In the summer of 1995, New Delhi was enduring a crushing, humid heat wave. But inside a nondescript government room in South Block, the temperature had nothing to do with the weather. A small group of intelligence analysts sat around a polished teak table, staring at a grainy, out-of-focus photograph projected on the wall. The image showed a Chinese-made M11 ballistic missile transporter somewhere in the Pakistani desert. Unlike older, liquid-fueled rockets that took hours to prepare, these M11s were solid-fueled. They could be fired instantly. And the intelligence confirmed Pakistan had dozens of them, each capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. This map shows the harsh geographical reality those analysts were facing. A ballistic missile launched from Pakistani territory covers its 300-kilometer range in a flash. It reaches New Delhi in under 5 minutes and Mumbai in under 7. There is zero warning time. Evacuating millions of civilians in that window is mathematically impossible. A senior scientist in the room delivered the truth with blunt honesty. If a launch was detected, India had no capability to intercept the missile in flight. Their only option would be to wait for the detonation, absorb the blow, and retaliate. This realization altered India's strategic posture. Having a nuclear arsenal offered no actual protection if an adversary could launch a strike that could not be stopped before it reached its target. 4 years later, in the summer of 1999, the theoretical threat materialized. Pakistani intruders occupied the icy heights overlooking the Srinagar-Leh highway, catching India off guard. The subsequent military campaign to evict them was a brutal, costly effort, fought at altitudes where the air was too thin for helicopters, and where every breath was a struggle for the troops. As the fighting intensified, both nations signaled a willingness to escalate. For the military planners watching the crisis unfold, the jagged fissures left by the recent Pokhran nuclear tests were a fresh reminder of the stakes. The possibility of a ballistic missile strike was no longer a distant projection. Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee, who had ordered India's own nuclear tests just a year earlier, recognized the severity of the situation. He saw that the lack of an active defense shield left the entire country exposed to a single launch that India had no way to answer. In the immediate aftermath of the conflict, Vajpayee convened a series of high-level meetings. He took the ballistic missile defense program, which had spent the last few years as a semi-official research effort, and formally elevated it to the highest national priority. The Kargil conflict moved the missile shield from a laboratory exercise into an urgent race to build a functional defense before the next crisis erupted. Developing a missile shield from scratch takes decades. The fastest way to acquire one is to buy it, but India quickly discovered that no country possessing operational missile defense technology was willing to sell it. The primary roadblock was the Missile Technology Control Regime, an international agreement designed to prevent the proliferation of aerospace technology. Because India was not a signatory, Western powers used the agreement to block the transfer of vital interceptor components. Even systems that were technically available came with prohibitive strings.
The American Patriot system was heavily restricted, and the Israeli Arrow system could not be transferred to a third party without direct approval from Washington. Turning to Moscow for their S-300 or S-400 systems offered its own set of dangers. Relying entirely on Russian hardware would create a permanent dependency on foreign suppliers for software updates, for system maintenance, and for critical spare parts. Military planners remembered the 1965 war, when foreign powers imposed sudden arms embargoes. If a supplier disagreed with India's political choices during a future crisis, they could withhold technical support, instantly turning an expensive defense shield into idle machinery. Importing a missile shield meant accepting a geopolitical leash. To secure true strategic autonomy, India had to engineer the technology domestically. The responsibility for building this indigenous shield fell to Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam. He assembled a small, hand-picked team of scientists at the Research Center Emarat, operating in secrecy to tackle a problem the rest of the world assumed they couldn't solve. Intercepting a ballistic missile requires hitting a bullet with another bullet. Both objects are traveling at speeds exceeding Mach 10. The interception must occur dozens of kilometers above the Earth, where the atmosphere is thin and unpredictable, leaving no margin for error. This diagram illustrates a major obstacle in aerospace engineering, the plasma sheath. As a warhead descends from space, atmospheric friction creates a superheated wall of fire around it. This plasma layer deflects incoming radar signals, making the warhead invisible to conventional targeting systems. Piercing that sheath required an entirely new type of electronic seeker. An engineer named Rajiv Sharma and his team spent 3 years in the lab, testing iterations to design an electronic eye fast enough to calculate an intercept trajectory through the interference in milliseconds. When the seeker prototype finally achieved a successful lock-on during a late-night simulation, the room was silent. Sharma and his colleagues had mastered the precise signal processing required to track a warhead through a plasma wall, a technology no other nation would even discuss with them. By solving the physics of the plasma sheath internally, without relying on imported blueprints, these scientists proved that a sovereign defense capability could be engineered from the ground up. By 2006, the international community still viewed India as a buyer in the global market, unaware of the silent, decade-long effort culminating on the coast of Wheeler Island. Hidden among the dense coastal mangroves stood an indigenous 2-stage interception system. It was the physical result of countless failed tests, midnight calculations, and an absolute refusal to remain vulnerable. While the test results remained classified for years, the foundation of the shield was established. The layers required to protect India's major population centers were finally moving from theory into operation. To the outside world, India was still a developing nation catching up. But in the silence of the test range, they had demonstrated a functional 2-tiered missile defense, moving from total vulnerability to a self-reliant posture that no foreign embargo could dismantle. For decades, a deceptively simple question haunted India's defense scientists. After more than 50 years of independence, why couldn't a nation of over 1 billion people simply purchase the protection its cities needed? The global arms market is rarely a straightforward catalog of weapons. It is a world of technology denial regimes and geopolitical leverage, where every sale is a calculated political move. Consider the American Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System, or THAAD. It represents the cutting edge of interceptor technology, but it comes with conditions that trade security for control. American personnel would be required to operate key components, and the United States would effectively decide when and how the system is used. The Israeli Aero system presented another roadblock. While battle-tested and highly capable, the system's development relied on American funding. Those agreements gave the U.S. an explicit veto over any third-party sale, and for India, that approval was never forthcoming. Purchasing a defense system that requires foreign handlers is a surrender of sovereignty. It trades national autonomy for a rented shield. This fear of dependency is rooted in the trauma of the 1965 war. During the height of the conflict, the United States imposed a sudden arms embargo, cutting off the flow of military hardware to the region. The embargo was immediate and devastating. Without a domestic supply chain, Indian fighter jets were grounded and tanks sat idle. The nation's leaders realized that in a time of war, a country reliant on foreign parts is a country at the mercy of its suppliers. Even recent deals like the 2018 purchase of the Russian S-400 carry this risk. The program spent a decade in negotiations, shadowed by delivery delays and the constant threat of American sanctions. This reliance creates a vulnerability that goes beyond the initial purchase. Software updates could vanish overnight. Spare parts could rot on a dock in Vladivostok. Strategic autonomy is the oxygen of India's foreign policy, and that autonomy disappears if a foreign capital holds the kill switch to your skies. To end this dependency, India moved its defense efforts behind the high walls of classified laboratories, the invisible cathedrals of the research center Emarat in Hyderabad. The eyes of the new network is the Swordfish radar. Its flat array contains thousands of transmit-receive modules, steering beams without moving. This allows it to scan vast volumes of space instantly, tracking hypersonic objects invisible to conventional systems. While the radar provided the data, the guidance software was the responsibility of Dr. Tessie Thomas.
Known for her total calm under pressure, she was tasked with the complex math required to steer an interceptor to a collision in space. Her algorithms had to control the divert and attitude control system,
the small thrusters that provide the final, precise steering adjustments. They had to perform this task while the vehicle was enveloped in a searing plasma sheath, a superheated layer of gas that blocks most communication. By mastering these internal components, the sensors, the thrusters, and the code, India systematically removed the points of leverage foreign suppliers once used. The shield was no longer a commodity to be bargained for. It was a capability owned entirely by the nation. Building this capability required an agonizing level of secrecy and personal sacrifice. Scientists lived in isolated colonies, unable to discuss their progress even with their own families. Rajiv Sharma was one of them.
He spent 3 years of isolated labor on a single signal processing unit for the missile seeker. It was painstaking work, where progress was measured in tiny, often invisible increments. Success finally arrived at 3 a.m. during a seeker test. A prototype successfully identified and locked onto a target drone, proving the years of individual struggle had produced a working sensor. When he returned home, he had to keep his success as secret as his failure. He couldn't explain the red eyes. He only said it was a good day at work. The heavy isolation of these labs, the missed weddings and the silent years, was the real price of the impossible shield. All of those silent sacrifices led to November 27, 2006. On a secret launch pad on Wheeler Island, years of theory faced the ultimate test. A modified Prithvi missile was launched from hundreds of kilometers away. Minutes later, the Prithvi Air Defense Interceptor roared off its pad to meet it. High above the Earth, at an altitude of 48 kilometers, the two vehicles collided. It was a perfect hit-to-kill interception. The announcement from the DRDO signaled that India had entered the exclusive tier of nations, joining only the US, Russia, and Israel, capable of a hit-to-kill interception. This test was just the beginning. The arms race is constant, and the upcoming advanced air defense tests are already pushing the boundaries of what this Indigenous network can do. But the fundamental barrier had been broken. The bullet had hit the bullet, and for the first time, the Indian sky had a guardian forged in Indian fire. In the pre-dawn darkness of December 6, 2007, a slender strip of land off the Odisha coast became the center of India's strategic focus. This is Dr. Abdul Kalam Island, where dense mangrove forests meet the stark concrete of missile launch pads. The mission is an endo-atmospheric interception. A modified Prithvi target missile is inbound, and the Advanced Air Defense Interceptor must engage it at an altitude of just 15 kilometers. At 15 kilometers, the air is thick and the target is moving fast. The diagram shows the interceptor's window of opportunity, a period of only a few seconds to acquire, track, and destroy the threat. The margin for error is 0. This isn't a laboratory experiment with a predictable flight path. To succeed, the system must perform under realistic conditions against a maneuvering target with minimal warning time. The AAD interceptor ignites. Its solid rocket motor generates enough thrust to push the vehicle through the sound barrier, racing toward the intercept point. Above the Bay of Bengal, the interceptor's kill vehicle slams into the incoming missile. The warhead is destroyed in a flash visible from the ground. This success demonstrated a two-tiered architecture in action. India now had the proven capability to intercept ballistic missiles both outside the atmosphere and within it. But a successful prototype is only a starting point. The next challenge is the transition to an operational shield, one that is reliable enough to protect millions of lives in the chaos of actual combat. At the Bharat's Dynamics facility in Hyderabad, the environment is defined by clean room protocols and precision tooling. This is where the interceptors move from design to mass production. Veteran technicians like Lakshman Rao provide the human element of this quality control. His hands have spent 30 years building missiles, learning the exact tactile feel of a properly torqued fastener or a correctly seated connector. While young engineers manage the complex algorithms, they rely on Rao's judgment.
He can spot a defective component that fails to meet the program's exacting standards simply by sight. When the first production AAD interceptor was completed, Rao applied the final inspection stamp. It was a missile built by Indian hands to stand guard over Indian cities. Every missile that leaves this floor represents a link in a national defense chain forged through decades of industrial experience. This effort reached beyond major defense contractors. In Coimbatore, a family-owned workshop that once built textile machinery was retooled to produce high-precision missile components. The owner, Venkatesh, saw his first batch of components rejected. They contained microscopic imperfections, invisible to the eye, but enough to compromise a strategic system. To meet the requirement, Venkatesh invested in new equipment and mastered the tolerances needed for imaging infrared seekers. Technicians must align these optical components with micron-level precision to ensure the interceptor can find its target. Venkatesh couldn't share the details of his work with his neighbors. He simply told them he was making parts for the nation, a secret he kept while his workshop met the standards of the defense supply chain. The precision achieved in these small workshops became a building block for the entire Indigenous architecture. That industrial precision makes the hit-to-kill approach possible. This method relies on destroying a target through kinetic energy alone, requiring a direct collision at hypersonic speeds. The closing velocity exceeds Mach 20. Two objects traveling kilometers per second must be guided into a collision within meters. Final adjustments are handled by the divert and attitude control system. Small thrusters fire in rapid sequence to correct the interceptor's course. By combining these technologies, India conducted over a dozen tests by the year 2020. Publicly available data shows a success rate exceeding 80% for the PAD and AAD systems. That percentage isn't just a statistic, it is the result of engineering a high level of reliability into every component of the system. In 2019, an AAD interceptor was tested in total darkness. A bright, ascending streak of exhaust split the night sky, signaling full operational readiness. Testing at night validates the system's sensors and software in a scenario where operators cannot rely on visual cues, reflecting the unpredictable nature of an actual missile threat. This test was supported by a network of command and radar vehicles. The Indian Air Force has since integrated these systems into their training, using simulators to prepare personnel for the stress of real-time battle management. The target was destroyed in the dark sky. This result was made possible by the collective manufacturing efforts of the defense industry and the training of the personnel manning the batteries. With maintenance procedures refined and tactics developed, the program moved from a research project to an active military capability. The system is no longer a prototype, it is an operational defensive layer. A multi-layered shield now exists as a network of interceptors, radars, and command centers. The architecture that once lived on paper is now a physical reality across the country. From the launch pads to the small specialty workshops, the country has standardized the high-precision manufacturing needed for missile defense. This indigenous technology now stands as a permanent defensive fixture. Silent, eternal, ready.
In the early hours of a cool February morning in 2024, millions across northern India slept peacefully through a confrontation unfolding high above the atmosphere. A solid-fueled ballistic missile had launched from a mobile platform somewhere in the Pakistani desert. Within seconds, Indian early warning satellites locked on. Against the freezing backdrop of space, the heat signature of the rocket plume was unmistakable. Down below, alarms triggered inside underground command centers. Operators scrambled to their consoles as the Swordfish radar swung its electronic beam to cover the western approaches, acquiring the hypersonic target as it crested its apogee. Trajectory calculations from the battle management system confirmed the missile was falling toward a major population center. Instantly, the system assigned a Prithvi air defense interceptor, initiating a launch sequence from a battery site in Rajasthan. This 3D topographical map visualizes an even more complex attack that took place later that same year, in October. Here, you can see a salvo of 3 incoming rockets launched across the border to overwhelm the defenses. The system rapidly evaluates trajectories, highlighting the 2 most critical paths. The outer layer eliminates the first target at high altitude, while the inner layer intercepts the second. The third missile, tracked toward empty desert, is ignored to conserve ammunition. By handling multiple simultaneous targets under extreme pressure, India proved it could identify, track, and completely dismantle a lethal incoming barrage. The theoretical shield was now a proven reality. For the scientists and engineers who spent decades building this capability, these interceptions offered profound relief. In Hyderabad, Dr. V.K. Saraswat, long retired from defense research, watched the news reports with tears in his eyes. The systems he had helped design had done exactly what they were meant to do: save human lives. Meanwhile, defense researcher Dr. Tessie Thomas received a quiet phone call from a former colleague stationed inside the command center. He confirmed that every calculation, every line of code, and every single algorithm had executed perfectly under actual combat conditions. For years, these researchers operated under strict international technology embargoes. They endured late nights, public skepticism, and repeated test failures to build their own hardware from scratch. That morning in the command center proved every sacrifice was worth it. The successful combat deployment of the Iron Shield accelerated global interest in Indian military hardware. By 2025, the country was exporting over $3 billion of defense equipment annually, reaching more than 40 nations. A clear measure of this newly recognized technological capability is the $375 million agreement with the Philippines. They became the first export customer for the BrahMos, a highly precise supersonic cruise missile developed jointly by India and Russia. When Philippine Navy Lieutenant Commander Maria Santos was assigned to lead the training program for the new system, she arrived with deep skepticism about Indian manufacturing. That doubt vanished the moment she walked into the BrahMos production facility in Hyderabad and inspected the sterile cleanrooms where the seekers were assembled. The export demand extended well beyond high-tech missiles. African nations battling severe internal insurgencies and the constant threat of improvised explosive devices turned to the Mahindra Armored Light Specialist Vehicle. Veteran officer Colonel Kwame Asante had lost friends to roadside ambushes. When he evaluated the compact four-wheel drive machine, he recognized right away that its dense, solid armor meant his soldiers could survive direct hits and actually make it back to base. In Armenia, a young technician named Anahit Sargsyan found her calling when she traveled to Pune for training. She learned the complex internal mechanics of Indian artillery systems, returning home as a master technician, capable of completely disassembling and rebuilding the massive guns. These human stories represent a shift in India's role on the global stage. By providing both the hardware and the specialized training to maintain it, the country has moved from a buyer of foreign technology to a partner that other nations now rely on to secure their own borders. Today, as dawn breaks over an Indian city, millions of people begin their morning routines without ever thinking about the heavily fortified, underground command centers operating beneath them. They don't see the massive radars actively scanning the horizon. They don't know about the solid-fueled interceptors waiting silently inside sealed canisters, ready to leap skyward at a moment's notice. That lack of awareness is exactly the point. The fact that ordinary citizens can buy groceries and drop their children at school without fearing what might fall from the sky is the truest measure of a defense system's success. Above the bustling streets and peaceful neighborhoods, India has built an invisible roof of iron. By proving it can protect its cities from complex attacks, the nation has established a permanent knowledge base and industrial infrastructure, one that ensures the safety of its citizens remains a quiet, undisturbed constant.